And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Bucks of America podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Vance. Now, the guest I have tonight is Zachary Craig Hanson. Now, he is the author of Turning Feral. Now, he is a high level, he's like a Joe Rogan type guy. He's got high level jujitsu, ultra marathons, academic pursuits, and interest. I mean, an entrepreneur all the way around, but he found his real unfiltered, authentic experiences being in the wild. And so this prelude is to discuss him and himself and this like that. And then I'm going to take the time to read his book, which I got right here that he sent to me. And I'm going to spend the next few months reading this, or well, it's not that thick of a read, so I'll probably get it done rather rapidly in the mix of my other books here. But this is pretty exciting. So Zach reached out to me through LinkedIn, and he said, "Hey, I want to send you my book." It's like, sure, all right. Well, I wasn't actually sure he was actually going to do it. And then next minute, I get the book showed up on my desk at my doorstop there. So that worked out pretty great. So I asked him if he wanted to be in the podcast. He's like, sweet, this is going to be fantastic. And now we get to actually dive into Zach. Now, what we've done is I've actually asked him a bunch of questions pre-set up so this way, and everybody that is a long-time listener already knows what to expect with my conversations here. So, man, Zach, take it away for us, sir.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for obliging my cold reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm glad the book made it in one piece too. Yeah, no, so I'm Zach, and as you mentioned, you kind of hit all the high points, right? Like I'm an adult onset hunter, so I did not grow up hunting. I did not grow up trapping. I did not grow up in a family that did any of that. I grew up in the South Carolina to be specific. So I was always kind of tangentially exposed to it through friend groups, but I never committed. For whatever reason, it just wasn't an interest of mine, really until I got into my late 20s, close to my early 30s. And I actually was, pursuing academic things. And I did a dissertation on the politics of food. And it really made me start to understand where in the hell my food comes from. And it was kind of a little bit of a concern for me. So at the time, I picked up a bow, a hand-me-down from a friend, and said, I want to learn how to do this. This seems intimate. It can't be that fucking hard. Excuse me. I don't know. Can I cuss in here, Jeff?
You can swear. I'm a big, like, I have it literally American my name on my title. So I'm a big proponent of the First and Second Amendment.
Well, that's perfect. So it was concerning, and I thought it was just going to be so easy to just pick up a bow, go hunt a deer, gut it, do all these things. And, the book will kind of detail a lot of that, but I was so wrong. I was so wrong on the level of ease. Like I just had this vision in my mind of what hunting was, and it turned out to be absolutely nothing like that.
I gotcha. So what were some of the so when did you actually get your bow then? Were you in your mid-20s, mid-30s?
I was in my late 20s. So I was living in Louisiana. So my ex-wife at the time, she was an FBI special agent. So we were down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Got a hand-me-down bow, and ridiculous how you learn, because I'm a slow learner. I'm not that guy who picks up something and just nails it the first time. That's why I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 15 years, ultra running, because I sucked for a long time and then I get mediocre. I don't ever really get to the point of being great at it all, but I get okay. So I knew to expect that when I picked up bow hunting. So I got this bow from a buddy I knew hunted with a draw length that was just a little too short for me. He was a little shorter than me, and started to follow some of the influencers at the time. So I was following John Dudley. So I picked up a nock to it because I figured that was the right way to learn how to shoot with a release. And I got in my backyard and I could not pull the damn bow back. I had no idea. It was set for 70 pounds. I'm a strong guy. I thought I'd be able to do it. Couldn't do it. So I sat back there behind my fence wrestling this bow for weeks before I accidentally pulled it back and then accidentally dry fired it out of the gate.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, it was just calamity after calamity. But yeah, late 20s and tough learning curve.
Definitely it is. It is. There's a lot of mechanics behind the whole process of bow hunting. And I like to research things before I dive into something. So
you're smarter than me.
So that's just like all comes down to wisdom. I have gray in my hair for a reason. I made a lot of learning situations go the wrong way. So it's like you just kind of go from there. But when I first got into archery I think it was 2015, I started beginning actually researching the whole process for it. I felt like who really kind of spun me into was Joe Rogan, because he
Mhm.
was kind of bored with it. And I've been hunting for years, so I wanted to the next level, which is pretty much compound bow, and then you got the
Mhm.
ultimate level, which you have, which would be your trad bows. And then if you go one step beyond that, that would be your atlatls, and
Yep.
that's not always illegal in a lot of different states. So it's like trad is where you're gonna go, and that's expert level right there to be able to take down a bull moose with a trad bow. But man, it takes a lot of development with the whole process with it. And what ended up happening after you dry fired your bow? Did anything traumatic happen to your arms or hands? Because that's a very traumatic experience.
It the answer is no. I was very lucky. I didn't send a string off a cam. I didn't just wreck my forearm. I mean, my you get that rattle through your bones from it, and that was a shock. And I put my bow down for a little while, but then I realized after that, thankfully, nothing was broken. I didn't send anything into my eyeballs. But then I knew the mechanics. I'm like, I can pull this thing back. So then I was able to start pulling the bow back, releasing it, pulling the bow back, and then eventually got the guts to put an arrow on the string and send it down my 25 little yard range right into a horse stall mat that I could barely pull the arrow out of. And then, from there, it was like this the reps, because once I got that, I was starting able to play with my sighting. I was able to actually do it. Now I have to admit that I did send an arrow into a neighbor's roof. Um, you know, Pulling the bow back instead of down and up, which is kind of what I do now. But again, just that immense learning curve that was so tough to do on my own. And again, I wasn't as smart as you. I wasn't doing as much research. I was just kind of bulling a china shop, which I would not suggest for others. Learn from my mistakes. But eventually I got it. And then I'm a data guy. So I kept a spreadsheet. So I was shooting 200 arrows a day, well before I ever went on my first hunt.
And so when you went on your first hunt, you didn't change anything. So then did you start digging into the breakdown of FOC and broadheads and all that fun stuff during
Nope.
this whole process? Oh, okay.
I mean, it was such like my 23 and me says I have more Neanderthal DNA than like most people. And I think that's pretty true. So like I didn't nerd out for being a nerd. I didn't nerd out on the things I should have nerded out on. Right. I just bought some Montec G3s. I don't even know if I looked at, how much they weighed. I didn't know how much I was, holding up front. I just slapped them on, shot a few, and was like, all right, like, let's go try this out now. And my first hunt, though, not knowing anything, and this is where like that barrier of entry for hunting can be interesting, is yeah, I got a bow. Yeah, I figured out how to shoot it okay. But now what do I do for getting a license? Like, where do I go hunt? Like, I don't have family or friends that are in this area that have ever hunted that can take me on put their arm around me, say, come on, pal, let's go. I've got a nice buck over here for you. And that was an adventure in and of itself.
So then, did you go to the DNR website? So describe the process you went through from how you learned how to buy a tag, go through the rules and regulations, and then go on your hunt.
Yeah, so I skirted it essentially. So what happened was I was looking all that up and I was trying to figure out how to get into a class in Louisiana with like the DNR to, do the field day that you have to do and then get your license, which would then obviously reciprocate in most other states. But being impatient, I was kind of looking up different outfitters in the Louisiana, Arkansas region. And eventually I landed on this guy who did pig hunts up in Arkansas on private land, which you don't need to have a license for, what he told me at the time, which did end up being true, thankfully. And he's like, for $200, bring you and a buddy up here. And I had a buddy who I kind of convinced to get in on this journey with me. And he said, you can shoot as many pigs as you want. He's like, I've got them. They're killing my crops. Just come kill them. I've got tree stands. I've got feeders, the whole lot. We'll get you on pigs. And that's what we did. We paid $200, drove 6 hours up above Shreveport into Arkansas, into this town that was 40 miles from the nearest Walmart, and hung out with this really interesting character who had a lot of cool taxidermy on the walls with some big boars. So we figured there was pigs there and spent, the first weekend hunting. and it turned out to be really boring, to be honest. We didn't see a damn thing the whole time.
Yeah, that is more likely than not you're what you're going to run into. It's not as action packed as that the guys on YouTube and other places that demonstrate how action packed it really is. But there's a lot of times where I'll go up and sit in a tree stand and not see a darn thing. But that's a good way to getting yourself into it. Now, did you just take your bow and arrow up there, or did you bring a gun with you?
Well, just my bow and arrow, and the guy suggested you should bring a gun, because you should. But I was stubborn. I'm still stubborn. I was like, you know what? I've been practicing with my bow. Like, I'm taking something with my damn bow. But there were two interesting things that happened on that trip. One, I'd never been in a tree stand in my life, and I did not have a safety harness. And the second thing was, talking about being boring. When you're working up to your first hunt, or you're going through this process of learning to hunt as an adult, and you are seeing these influencers or like the Instagram or whoever else is on the different social channels, and it's all action packed, like, you do get this expectation that that's what this should be like. And I think in my head I had prepared myself for every single scenario. A pig could walk in from this angle, I'm going to range it, I'll be able to hit it, all that good stuff. But I never prepared myself for obviously the most likely eventuality, which was nothing. And that was probably the hardest mental hurdle to come over on that trip, is because I never even considered nothing happening, which was the reality.
Yeah, that's understandable because when you know how long ago was this hunting trip, this first experience?
6 years ago now, almost.
All right, so that is
Yeah.
a good steady learning curve. So then you were only up there for the weekend, correct?
Yep. Only up there for the weekend. We spent 2 days in tree stands freezing our asses off for 12 hours. And I realized, like, getting down from a tree stand after sitting there still freezing and, jackhammering in the stand, it's like getting in a fight. Like, you feel like your body, your back, everything is just terribly sore. And the fact that I never practiced from a tree stand, when I got up there and I was looking at the angles I'd have to shoot, I'm like, I don't know if I can even do this. It's so much I did not take into consideration.
Understandable. So then, now after that 10x learning experience, what happened after that? What did you go through next?
Yeah, so that I went through. So my ex-wife, her family is from Middle Tennessee, some of the whitetail mecca of the U.S. And I'd always been afraid. Her family was a hunting family. Her dad was a deer hunter, brother's a deer hunter, the whole lot, uncles, cousins, whatever. In fact, I'd always go every year to Middle Tennessee, Shelbyville to be precise, and they would have a yearly squirrel hunt where they'd have the Tennessee DNR come out, they'd raffle off stuff. And I always, like, before I got into hunting, I was like, this is so silly, but they had such a blast, and I was just so myopically focused thinking it was stupid that I never participated. And I always regret that, hindsight being what it is. But it was exposed me. So I thought, wow, I should really just go ask my father-in-law to teach me to hunt. And I thought he was going to be like, oh God, this guy's asking me to, sit in my tree stands or be on my hunting leases. But, the opposite obviously happened. He welcomed me with open arms. He's like, let's do it. And when he said, let's do it, like, he meant it. Like, it was a couple months before the season. So I had to go do my field day, get licensed and everything. But I started getting so much information and realizing that for so many whitetail deer hunters, it's a science. He was sending me photos, trail cam photos, food plots, clover plots, where his tree stands were, what the heights were, what the angles of shot were, where the deer would probably be coming in from. It was absurd and eye-opening to me.
That's amazing. I'm glad he really opened you up for open arms. I've always had warm experiences with folks that want to move into it, and all I hear is a lot more positive interactions than they do have negative. And that's the upside about hunters. We want to share the knowledge because we're a very minute, a very small group of people, and if things go the wrong direction, we could lose this as an opportunity. And now we're starting to see some of that stuff show up in, like, New Mexico, where they're trying to make it an elite program for you in order for you to hunt, or you got to buy into gaining access to that information. You still there, Zach? I think we have some technical difficulties here on Zach's end here. Looks like it has frozen on him. But also, while he's working on that, please drop a like, comment, and then on top of that, too, please subscribe. I greatly appreciate your assistance and help to do that. I need all the help I can get to grow. I'm only at 90 subscribers, so thank you for everybody that has clicked that subscribe button. And if you are listening, please go ahead and tell your friends to open up a separate tab. Oh, there we are, Zach. You back?
I told you we would meet Murphy tonight, and it did not disappoint. So I apologize to the listeners, but we were texting back and forth beforehand and joking about our tech savviness, and I said, well, something's going to happen, and sure enough, it did. So I apologize for that.
Nope, that's how technology goes when it comes to live. And most people that do tune into lives, they already know what's going on. Good thing for you, I can talk, so it worked out pretty well. So now you were discussing with me that before everything froze, that your father-in-law was really going into the nitty-gritty with things and providing you a very warm welcome. So all that information you were given, how did you digest that and turn that into a what's what I'm looking for here? Turn that into practice, essentially.
Yeah, and it was being guided, right? So it was him giving me this information, coaching me how to digest it. And then it was me and that same friend who went on our unsuccessful pig hunt, who went out to Tennessee. And, I go into detail on this in the book, so I don't want to give away too much, but
okay. That makes sense.
Ultimately, we went out there, and the first weekend, my buddy had success. He shot a doe. It was beautiful, but similar to the pig hunt, where I did not exactly prepare myself for the real outcomes, the same thing happened for both of us. Whereas before we got there, we said, you know what? We don't know how to field dress a deer. So there's a processor nearby. We'll just drag the thing out of the woods, cockily when we get our deer, and drive it to 30 minutes to the processor and call it good.
Okay.
What I didn't take into account, which leads to this whole calamity of errors and hilarity in the book, is he shot his doe at about 8 a.m. on a Sunday in Middle Tennessee. And what that means is everybody's at church, including the processor. So we got the deer out of the woods, like flipping, weekend at Bernie's, trying to drag this doe out, dragging his head on every rock and sweating. Drive all the way to the processor as the day's starting to warm up and the rigor mortis is setting in, only to be saying, like, you can drop your deer in the freezer, but please make sure that it's gutted. And we're like, oh shit. And so then we drove back to my in-laws another 30 minutes. So again, getting warmer, and we're like, we can't lose this meat. So essentially we got backed up against a corner. My father-in-law's like, I'll be another hour at church. And we had to commit. So we propped a flipping iPhone up between the hind quarter of this doe, got out our Benchmade knife, and just dove in literally and did a terrible job, but got it done, and we're able to eventually go and drop it off.
Well, that is always a fun experience, but at least you're able to save the meat and such like that. And usually your first time is always going to be the roughest, but you're lucky that at the time that the process still did that. A lot of processes are here in the Midwest. They won't touch it unless it's deboned. You got to make sure everything's all removed before you can do it. So is that because you live currently in Idaho, don't you?
I live in Atlanta, Idaho, which is a town of 35 people at the end of an 80-mile dirt road, no grocery store, no gas station. We're all self-sufficient. We've got like already 3 feet of snow on the ground. So yeah, it's been a big curve since then for me too, just on the sustainable life aspect as well. And now I can definitely, gut animals, skin animals. I got into trapping and tanning and doing all of that from a fur perspective too. So it's changed a lot since then.
Yeah, I know when I was flipping through the book there, you also sent me that picture of you when you had trapped your first beaver, which is always still a fun feat to achieve.
Oh yeah, and it is. And actually I've got the otter. Let me grab it because it's kind of cool. It's 5.5.
Go ahead.
But yeah, you can see I've got ferns all over the place now, but this is the first otter that I got the other day, nice and fleshed out, and got to take it to Fish and Game to get it tagged up yesterday. But yeah, it was from that point where we fumbled our way through gutting my friend's deer to my getting my first buck the following weekend and getting to do it again, the reps came. But it was after that deer, literally the month after I shot my first deer, I went through an unexpected divorce from my now ex-wife. And that was the real catalytic moment of my life where, we didn't have any kids. And I was at this point where I was really getting into hunting. And I was like, I could live anywhere. Where do I want to be? So within a week of my finding out about this, I was in my car pointed north to Idaho and never turned back.
No kidding. So you finished all your divorce. At least that's the upside about not having kids involved. It makes things a lot more easy to transition from point A to point B real fast. So that's pretty exciting that you made that big lope. Now, what motivated you to choose out of all the states that you could go hunting? Why Idaho?
Yeah, and there's a little bit about this in the book too. But my ex-wife and I, we did the normal kind of, well, somebody pointed out that it's not normal, but we would do like a decision tree to pick out our vacation spots every year. And we've gone to Turkey. We've done all these exotic vacations every year. And we're like, we never really explored the US. So that year prior, right when I was getting into hunting, decided to go up to Idaho. So we flew to Boise and drove up to Stanley, Idaho in the Sawtooth. And it blew my fucking mind. Like from the drive from Boise to Stanley, I saw my first bald eagle ever in my life. I saw elk. I saw antelope. I saw all these different critters and my first wolf in real life. And it just was insane. And like the Sawtooth Mountains, which is, I live on the better side of the Sawtooth in Atlanta now from Stanley.
Okay.
But it was just a calling to me. And I told my ex-wife that I'm like, we are moving here at some point. And she laughed at me. She's like, the FBI is never going to let me do that for 20 years. So maybe then. And I was like, it's happening. So then when that all happened, a couple months later, I just felt that calling and I just said, well, I'm going to go do it, knock it out.
Awesome, man. That's a amazing situation that you went through there. Unfortunately, it's nobody ever wants to go through divorce. So because it's like, sounds like this has all been now, has your progression of well, obviously we know that you've gotten into trapping and everything that's changed so rapidly. So now, you in the book, did you mention that when you got divorced yet?
Yeah. So it was immediately after I got that buck, and that's when I went through the divorce, and that was that catalytic event, and made my way north, and then started looking at property. So I kind of toured all of Idaho. I had a little apartment in Boise that I was staying in for a few months, but ultimately found a cabin in this town I live in now that backs up to 3,000 acres of public land, so I can open my door and be in nothing. In fact, going to the chapter when I shot my first archery bear, despite my efforts to do spot and stalk everywhere else around my cabin in crazy terrain, I ended up shooting my first bear in my underwear off my back deck at like first light one morning. So, it's out there for sure.
That is smart to be able to do that. And like you put yourself in a very place to succeed. So what do you do for work then? How are you able to be so remote and be able to bring in an income?
Yeah, and that's where I feel very lucky. So in my effort to keep up with the Joneses before I kind of went on this adventure, I had gotten into tech. So I'm not a technical guy by trade. I did political science. I did some government work overseas out of school. And then I was like, well, this government salary is not going to pay the bills. So let me get into tech. So I went back and got a graduate degree in statistics, kind of made my way into an industry job at IBM, and then got into machine learning and AI. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. So I've just been very lucky that my entire professional career leading up to that, I'd been remote. It was always have bag, will travel. So I spent so much time on planes flying to see teams in New York, San Francisco, or Austin, wherever they were at. But as things came, as the pandemic came, it all pared back. And so I was just able to be anywhere that I could have an internet connection. In that little town in Atlanta, Idaho, of all places, no cell phone service, but there is a rural telecom DSL line that'll give you 10 megs up. And that's just enough to do a Zoom call.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So it worked and I had it. Now, what was interesting is is I had to reframe how I worked for my job doing tech stuff, because if the internet went down, which it would if we got 20 feet of snow up top where the repeater was, or, we're running our own power off our own little dam. So it would either freeze over or dry up in the summer. And, if you didn't have a generator, which I didn't at the time, you were SOL. So I had to start being really good at being asynchronous with my communication. So my emails were better. My Slack was better. Everything was more pointed, because at any time I could be off, potentially for days. And I just made sure my employer knew that. And, thankfully I was in a position where they understood and, knew what I had just been through. So they worked with me quite a bit.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's funny how you mentioned Slack, because I work in Slack all day long.
Yep.
Dealing
And
with
it's all it is nowadays, man.
Oh, I work with the VA, and I do a lot of testing for the DBQs and such. And so we've been testing like almost every single day for the last 3-4 months, when I started primarily focusing on VBMS testing. So it has been a wild ride. See, I originally wasn't into technology. I've always been work with my hands or sales. And then I met my now wife, and I got a job working for a company that got bought up by a bigger conglomerate. And now I've worked my way from working with veterans, like talking to them, scheduling appointments and stuff like that. Now I'm on the back end working with the VA, trying to make sure our bridge between the VA and the practitioners we have in our network makes life easier for the veterans. And which, since I've been with the company, we've been able to take our 90-day turnaround time down to 21-day turnaround time. So if a veteran submits a claim for compensation and pension, within 21 days, we're already seeing them in front of a practitioner, and then going back and hopefully they're getting an increase or some type of approval.
That's awesome. Yeah. And Slack's a great tool to do all that stuff asynchronously to kind of get the job done. And it's a hat tip to people. And I know I'm fortunate, and I don't want to overlook that I've been able to move to where I have, which is a mecca for everything. Like literally out my door, I can get over the counter tags for any game animal. Like I've got 15 wolf tags in my pocket for my wolf trapper's license. I've got, otters, beaver, mink, fisher, the whole lot that I've been able to just immerse myself in. And it's all because I've had a job that supported me in that. And I know that's rare, but it is becoming a little bit more of a reality for some folks. Like you can really do it anywhere, especially with Starlink. And Starlink's been a game changer for us up there as far as having the high speed internet as well.
Nice. You got a little Elon Musk up in your neck of the woods. That's pretty badass.
Yep.
I live in the mecca of whitetail hunting here in Wisconsin. A lot of people think it's Iowa or Kansas, but when you look at the BNC or Buckmasters or Pope and Young, the biggest bucks that have ever been shot in history are out of Wisconsin. And we do have this ridiculously cheap price for non-residents to come and get a tag. And it's like, I'm more encouraging for it because we have a lot of public land. I mean, heck, I in my area within the 15-mile radius that I hunt, there's something like 4,000 acres of land to hunt. Now this is all bluff country, so for you this would be you'd love it because it's all up and down hills. It's really got to be concentrated on how much you walk, how fast you walk, so you don't break a sweat. The only downside is that all we have is whitetail, a very small season for black bear, but we do have a lush amount of small game. And then we've only had our inaugural or our elk season for 4 years now, 5 years. So that's been 4 years. 4 years is we only do 10 tags, so it's like good luck trying to get drawn for it. I could probably be putting my daughter into it, and she may not even get drawn until she's in her 50s.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it goes, and that's why Idaho, similar to Wyoming for in-state residents, is just a great place. And I mean, we're also very friendly for out of state because we don't have a point system. It's over the counter. You got to be online whenever they go up, and it's first come, first serve, which is pretty cool. In my opinion, being a new hunter, because that's also that thing. It's like getting started in my 30s almost, I'm boxed out a lot from preference points for other places. Like, yeah, maybe I started a year or two ago, but I haven't been building those. I didn't have a dad who started putting my name in the hat for preference points in these different Western states when I was, whatever the youngest age is, 5, 6, whatever it is.
Correct.
And, so there's a little bit of a disadvantage there too. So that's one reason I was also drawn to Idaho, just from the openness for new hunters.
That is a plus too, because if you venture just a little bit further west, before you go into Oregon, they have some funky laws with their preference points, and even for their in-state folks too. It still takes a minute to get opportunities and such. And plus, it's like you got a lot of people that are anti, and then you got everybody else that wants to annex or leave Oregon to move over to Idaho. So you got that separation between the two. Now, as you've moved out there, because how long you been out there now? For what, 4 years, 5 years?
About 4 years now. Yeah.
Okay. So, what was some of the things that you recognized right off the get go that you needed to add to your toolkit to keep marching down your path to becoming a more confident hunter?
Well, first and foremost, when I got up to my cabin for the first time and I took like a, you know, half-mile stroll out my back door, it was fitness, right? I mean, I've done jiu-jitsu, I've done ultramarathons at sea level. It's just a different beast when you're over 7,000 feet. And, I ended up doing a mountain tough course. I think it was their 4570. And it was just all lunges. And I was like, I'm so fucking tired of lunges. But then when I went on my first elk hunt above 10,000 feet, it's still like I was huffing and puffing like a fat kid because, I was like, oh, I'm in shape. I run, I do all this stuff. But when you've got a pack, you've got your bow, you're in thin air, it's insane how much it drains you. So fitness was one thing. And that's something I've always taken very seriously and continue to this day. But the second was just involvement in conservation, to be honest. Like, it's one of the best things someone had recommended to me, and I probably went a little overboard with it, but it's paid dividends now, is like join these different, conservation groups. So I joined RMEF, so Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Ultimately, I eventually got to Idaho Trappers Association, good friends with the president there, Rusty Kramer. And then Idaho Fish and Game, like a good friend of mine is Commissioner Tim Murphy. And, we've had a lot of communications, and I do my best to go to all the commission meetings I can, because I think one thing that I've noticed amongst, not all, but some of my friends who grew up hunting, like, they don't really have an interest in that. It was just something they did. And for me, like, I wanted to be a well-rounded hunter, and I felt like I needed to understand, why are we making these caps or quotas on certain animals? Why are people anti, when this is something that I'm seeing is very rehabilitating for me and just a great way to put great table fare down. So that was the thing. So it was fitness, and then understanding almost the political dynamics of the whole outdoor industry, and specifically Idaho. And it was a wild ride even in that respect, but it gave me contacts. It allowed me to understand where to hunt, why animals are pressured, why they're not. And it gave me a little bit more insight than I think I would have if I just kept going blind.
Makes sense. That's why one of the motivating factors of being in why I started my podcast, because it's like I've always been to conservation. My dad was always involved in Iowa when it came down to like the gun range or hunting, or when it came down to certain regulations that it would affect his day to day or his friends, that he would actually go to the meetings, go to town hall, and listen to everybody speak on the matters and such. So that kind of motivated me into becoming where I'm at right now with everything. But with this being a global podcast, because I do have listeners all across the world, which is thank goodness for SoundCloud, because it opens up those areas in South America, Australia, Canada, down in Russia. So it's like it's interesting to see when I look at my analytics and where all my podcasts are being downloaded. So now it gives me an opportunity to actually look at everybody's not necessarily geopolitics, but like when it comes down to what's going on, like what are they going through? Droughts? Are they going through high acidity? Are we having difficulties with population control? Kind of like what was going on, we saw with the crab situation there in the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, over 1 billion crabs just up and disappeared. So it's a very strange situation to have, considering how many sonars are in the bodies of water and such to keep track of all this stuff. And there's been some interesting, I've seen some weird things pop up on my timelines when it comes down to what has hell happened in 2021. Like we saw, there was a gigantic sheet of ice fell off the Antarctica, and some believe that something may have been released from that because
Mhm.
of what could be still underneath. Because I remember when they had the earthquake over there in Japan, and when it opened up this cave system, it introduced 130, 140 different new species that we didn't even know about. So it's
Mhm.
like we have no idea what led over there. And from what I understand, it was a massive piece of ice. So who knows what's all going on? Then I don't know if you heard this, but there was a 40-ton bomb that was let off by the Navy just out east of Florida. So at this point in time in history, we kind of know we don't need to really test our bombs anymore. We know what the lethality is. So my mind is going to the cryptoid side of mine. What did they use it on?
Yeah.
Because now we're starting to see megalodon pictures start show up. Like there's footage surface from an oil rig in Japan that they have over an hour worth of footage from a megalodon. Then
That's crazy.
early this summer, they took some pictures to down there by South America. They saw this massive, big old plume of fish, and then they're zooming in, and they found a 70-foot megalodon. It's
That's
like
crazy.
it's just weird how we're seeing all this stuff. But then again, we know more about the space than we do about Earth or the ocean's water. So what's underneath the ocean surface there? So it's weird how did something get released that's eating up all these crabs, or is it because of all the garbage that has been blown off the mainland across the world? There's like a Texas size floating island of garbage between California and Hawaii. So
Yeah.
is it that causing the issues, destroying this particular marine life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's to your point, though. It's interesting to see the development. And even if you think about when you think about it on the macro scale like that, it's like space. You can't wrap your mind around it. But I thought I could at least wrap my mind around small and big game animals in Idaho. But even just in Idaho, there was so much more that I was just so unaware of. It was just like Pandora's box opened up for me when I started to peel back those layers of conservation and what really goes into it. And, really kind of accelerated, I think, my hunting more than anything is understanding patterns and talking to people, talking to biologists before I'd go on hunts and, things like that, that really kind of gave me the hockey stick growth curve.
Which is smart to do to reach out to it. So I'm kind of curious now. So do you still have your first bow that was given to you?
Yes.
So now I'm assuming now you've graduated to new, more sophisticated technologies. So I'm kind of curious what is your go-to in your very remote area, because do you even have a pro shop in your area, or have you learned how to do all the work yourself?
Yep. So, well, again, talking about it in the book a little bit and learning stuff the hard way. So my first bow, it was a Matthews with wooden handles, a single cam, uh, great bow. It was hand me down. It was well maintained. But my buddy who was going on this adventure with me bought a brand new Matthews, beautiful bow. And the first day that we were out in our tree stands, he had put his bow on a hanger and he saw a deer coming in right at first light and took his bow off the hanger and it rolled the string right off.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
Right. And so I had just gotten in my tree stand and I see him walking and I'm like, oh man, he must have shot a deer or something. He wouldn't come over here if he didn't do that. So I get down the tree and he shows me his bow with his limp string and we didn't know how to fix it. And this was the Saturday. This was the day before he ended up shooting his doe. And we had to rush back to the trailhead, find a pro shop somewhere about an hour away. They're only going to be open till like noon. So we just hauled ass there, had to get them to, fix it, fix the cam because it had kind of bent it a little bit, shoot a few arrows. All right, we're good. And then we went back the next day. But that was an experience that made me say, like, I need to really learn. So I have a bow press. I restring my own bows now, all of that. I carry a little, mini bow press in my bag when I'm out in the backcountry because you never know, a broadhead hits your string, you snag it on something. But yeah, that was an event that made me really invest in understanding how to do it. And again, at that time, I didn't realize how remote I was going to be living, but it paid dividends for me when I could do all that on my own.
Oh yeah, definitely. It may seem feeling like intimidated when you look at the price of a bow press or one of those bow vices because they're the
Mhm.
bow presses are grand. The bow vices are 250, and good luck trying to find them used because they don't last very long on the open market. So sometimes
Yep.
it's just easier to snag something brand new. But for a guy like in your situation, this is a perfect way to set yourself up for success. Now it's like I know that Matthews now that you're able to remove the strings off the cams without having a
Mhm.
bow press.
Yeah.
APA's been doing that for years, and what is that? I think Bowtech's the other one that has that ability where you can be able to do everything in the field as well, next to some of the diamonds and such.
Yeah. And I shoot a Hoyt now for whatever that's worth. I've enjoyed that.
Nice. It's when it comes down to archery, folks. The bow only comes down to what makes sense for you because everybody's going to have a different vibration in the grip. Like for me, I shot Hoyt up until I ended up having issues with my elbow, so I switched over to Elite. Now I'm shooting an Expedition, so it's like go for whatever it feels natural. It feels very fluid. That's what I find like with archery is such a big attractant to it is that it's like it's got a certain acrobatic asset or aspect to it. So when you're
Mhm.
drawing it back, you're getting your muscles into place and you're getting your anchor point down. You're going through this mental checklist so you don't hurt yourself, dry fire your bow, or even like I've had situations where I've had my release the tension is not strong enough on it where it will pop loose, especially
Yeah.
with some of the hot shots or Carters if you have them too loose. Because sometimes like I have one release where it's just real thin. It's like I just bring it right back, I drop my finger on it, and just pull back. And
Yep.
that's what Dudley teaches. He's a big proponent. If you're going to do a thumb release, your goal is to wrap your thumb around it, rest on it, and just let your bones naturally drop back. So this way, then you're getting that through shot.
Yep. And that's what I learned on a silverback from John Dudley. So yeah, I guess that's the sister release to the knock to it where you actually punch it. I eventually ended up going to the knock to it with a punch, a thumb release, just because I wanted that consistency because it was a little jumpy for me, like holding it at like 15 pounds or whatever. Um, and on some of these where I was really needing to hold it for a long time, on some of these longer shots, I felt a little more comfortable with the knock to it. But I still practice with a silverback to get that, that technique down.
Oh, definitely. Then, so let's see here. I'm looking at.
We were talking about conservation. We were going through all the learning curve of being out there.
Yeah. So, because I'm trying to. It's like since I haven't read the book, it's like you keep on telling me it's like, oh, it's in the book. It's like, oh man, it's like I'm trying to reformulate my thoughts this way that I'm not trying to give away from the book. Well, let's see here.
Well, we can touch on it, and I'll just say it's in the book too. So shoot away. Don't censor yourself on account of me. So I'll
I
still hopefully people will pick up the book too.
I think so too. I feel like it's going to be it's a very attractive book. So it's like and on top of that turning feral, it kind of gets a person looking at it. It's like now because when you think of feral, it's like you are. But the good thing I like how you chose a ram instead of like a hog because then it's like, well, is this book about hogs? Because turning feral is a common thing when you got
Mhm.
pen raised hogs. All of a sudden get released to the wild, and all of a sudden, hey, now we got some feral hogs. But that's the best part about your journey with the whole process. And plus, you have some really credible people giving you positive quotes, which is always a good thing to have.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I mean, the journey though after that, it was elk hunting, antelope hunting, bear hunting, and then getting into trapping, which was its own interesting thing. I'd always been fascinated with mountain men as a young kid. I always thought I was born in the wrong era. So actually, of all things, the beaver trapping was something that I was so attracted to for some reason. But again, learning and finding mentors in trapping, I would argue, is 10x harder than finding a mentor in hunting. There's just so few, and it's
True.
so
Mm-hmm.
ran over by aunties or whomever, because of the cruelty of it. And I go into that in the book of like wrestling with my own morality with some of the trapping things that I've been through and eventually getting mentorship by I guess you call them old timers in the space, which can be kind of violent, even though it's very much a kind and nice way to put an animal out of its misery. but sometimes it's very intimate. It's way more intimate with an animal that's live caught than, from 30 yards, 40 yards from an animal that doesn't necessarily know you're there. It's a different experience, and one that I think everyone should have to go through, to be honest, to kind of really come full circle on what morality is and what it means to really connect with, either food you're going to eat or fur you're going to take to make mittens or hats or blankets for your kids. And that was the full circle. And that was the whole point of the book. It's, I ultimately went to the woods after this divorce to come into my own, rehabilitate myself, and ultimately get away from people. I was just so done with everything post-divorce. And bits and bobs from the book, I ended up finding this great mountain woman, and I'm remarried and now have 2 kids.
Okay. That escalated quickly.
It did extremely quickly. But it was great. She's my partner and everything, as far as like hunting, trapping, raising kids out there in the wild. I mean, she's a G. And then, the community there of 35 people, like I was so over people. I didn't want to really, deal with people, but it was kind of like the Grinch. My heart grew 3 sizes to a degree, because out there you have to rely on other people. Avalanches, and then going to in the book, just these different events that happen. And my new wife almost died right in front of my eyes when the dog took her out of her knees and she cracked her head on a rock.
Ooh, scary.
And, we're 4 hours away, from a hospital, and she was 8 months pregnant. Like, the town comes together for things like that. And so, like, what it really did is hunting, I thought it was going to be this journey into a solo, be like the Remy Warren solo hunter. I just don't want to be around anybody, but it really actually brought me into a community that I care about. Broadly, like this podcast, other people I've met through this journey, and the actual community I lived in. And that's probably been the most rewarding and unexpected turnout of this whole journey, which is what prompted me to write the book.
That is quite remarkable that everything went how it happened to you. So, I mean, man, talk about like having your life flash between your eyes when you see your wife fall down like that. Yeah, I got lucky. My wife likes to hunt. She likes to do that stuff. She's not much of a trapper, but I'm not much of a trapper either. We were talking about mentors, I actually know I've actually had a trapper on my podcast twice. He lives in Iowa and he's trapped everything, so he's got a very well versed knowledge and stuff like that. And he's invited me to come down. It's just having the time to get down there, but also considering the bad weather. I'm not a big fan of dealing with. I will be out in the bad weather, but I don't like driving in the bad weather, because I am far more cautious, because I've been in the ditch. I've ran into things. It's like I don't want to go through that headache. It's like I'd rather just make it like, well, it's like if it's gonna snow, I'll go get the night before, and then be there ahead of schedule, just kind of like planning ahead. It's just like the joys of experiencing going through that. So out of all the animals you've trapped so far, what's been the most intriguing to learn about their habits and their processes to be able to get that animal to step on that square inch in a 100,000 acre area?
Wolf.
Yeah.
Wolf. And I haven't succeeded yet either. And I've had some strong mentors helping me along the way. Like, it's if you believe in spirit animals, I've always believed a wolf is that for me. Like, when my mom's dad, my grandfather, he was a hunter, but he died when I was really young, and he had a cabin in Georgia, and we'd always go there as a kid. And I always had these, call of the wild ideas. And he had this beautiful picture of a wolf, and I have it up in my net cabin now. And I was always just attracted to that. And I never thought about hunting a wolf. I always thought I was going to have a pet wolf as a kid, right? Like most kids do. And I never thought about it. But then when I got out to Idaho and I learned about the conservation efforts, the reintroduction of wolves, and we have 5 packs running around our area in Atlanta, Idaho specifically. And I'd see all the elk kills. If you drive up and down our road in the winter, and it's just a literal bloodbath all around. So then I went and got my wolf trapper's education course and learned to snare and, put out the footholds. But they are the smartest animal like I've ever experienced. Like, you can be like 4th in inches with a wolf and they'll outsmart you. it's just amazing. And I put in so many hours, so much effort, the descenting, the everything, the trail sets, the P post, everything. And I just haven't been able to connect. So it's not something I've caught. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's the thing that I've been most enamored with, and something that I've already got wolf steel on the ground this year. And, hoping that I'll connect, sooner rather than later, for conservation efforts and for my own ego, to be honest. But it's been interesting. And then second to that is beaver, because beaver are just freaking awesome.
That's what I was leaning towards, is to finding out, because there's pine marten. There's a variety of different animals you can trap, because we've all seen a mountain man, we've all seen the life below zero and such, and I've always been enamored by that, because they are really the ones that are living freedom. But it's like,
Mhm.
when there's certain times in a person's life to be able to do that, and the first time for a man to do that is when they don't have kids. And it's like, by time I saw the attraction to going to those remote areas and being away from everybody, I was still too young and immature, and I wanted to recognize what it. And then now I have a wonderful 9-year-old, so it's like, doing something like that now, it does not work with my life plan to be able to do that, because it definitely changes your whole perspective. And I'm no longer I see my daughter often, but it's like, I don't want to put more and more miles away from me. Granted, I could do a lot of stuff here in Wisconsin, but
Yep.
it's one of those things where I'm not as motivated, because I have all the luxuries that you don't have.
Yep.
So that, with that in mind, it's like not like it's a not a lazy man's thing to do. And it's like, but you also have to weigh out everything else that you have, because trapping is a lifestyle, and if you don't have your life revolving around that particular topic, good luck trying to be able to be flourishable on it, because it's like, it's difficult. Like my friend I was talking about, Jeremy Salter, had been on the podcast a couple of times. He was he he's been able to make a living strictly on trapping, and then, like, there's some places that will pay him to come trap off certain animals,
Mhm.
but he also does guided work in the spring and the fall, so that amount of work pays for his lifestyle.
Yeah, and
So
that's definitely not where I'm at. Like, I've had to accept that it's a hobby for me. And even as a hobby, and like with fur prices being what they are, it'd be very hard um, to make a living on it. And some people do, and that's great. But to your point, like, here's a fun story. Ultimately, like, when you talk about having to commit to it, so we live out in the middle of nowhere. I can get on my sled or my side by side in the summer. I can go run my trap lines, right? A couple miles out, couple miles back, we're good to go. But that means that I'm up every day, hand on the Bible with my wife, 3:30 a.m., write for an hour. I still write books, so I'm writing other books. Write for an hour. Then I'm out either setting or running trap lines, which means I'm usually bringing back animals. And then those animals are hanging and looming over me while I do my full, 8+ hour workday of Zoom calls. Maybe I'll get a break and can start skinning one at some point. But that also means that I'm up till at least midnight skinning animals, either folding them and putting them in the freezer, or starting to flesh them, or leaving them out in the cold so I can flesh them the next day. And it's a long process. And it's one of those things where, when you shoot a deer, you shoot an elk, you're like, woohoo, it's exciting. And then you're like, oh, the old trope, like, oh, the real work's starting now, boys. Like, let's
true.
get to it. But when you're trapping, like, that's real work, because you don't want to put a hole in the pelt. You don't want to, get aggressive with it. And like, because those things matter, whether you're keeping the pelt yourself or selling it. It's intricate, it's detailed, it's intimate in the way that you have to be focused. And you find yourself up to 1, 2 in the morning, and then you're like, oh shit, I got to wake up in 2 hours, and it's this cycle that you can only last for so long. But it is a commitment, like you said, and it's a hard life. I don't think
Definitely.
there's anybody harder working in the US than like somebody who's trying to make a living trapping.
Oh, definitely. Because there was the guy on Mountain Man. I can't remember his name, but he flies. He lives down. Well, I think he lives in Seattle or Oregon or wherever. And then he goes up to Alaska, where he lives there. I mean, he may have things changed. I haven't watched the show in a while, but that's what he makes. A portion of his living off of is doing that, especially when pine martens through the air or through the roof and such. But we've lost the value of the hair, and why we do, the trapping and why we used to do it. Because I remember Steve Ranella talk about growing up in the 80s and stuff like that, and listening to people having long trap lines and being able to go and do such an activity and actually make a living off of it, make a living off of it. Now it's like we've gone through everything to be synthetic. It's like we've lost the value of why we do it. Now we have these rampant issues with raccoons and when you come down in the southern states, then you got rabbits, and then they tend to excel, and or they'll go through their 7-year cycles and such. So there's like, you always got to be, it's just unfortunate we don't have that market for it anymore, because that provided a lot of balance with everything. Because when you get those what is it, you get the beavers, and what's the other animal that lives in the water? I know what it is too.
Otter.
There we go, otter. And then the other one is that just likes to burrow itself, makes its homes in the banks, and
The muskrat.
There we go, the muskrat. That son of a gun is that when that gets into a riverbank, they become very destructive rather rapidly, and then it's like then the city has to come find somebody to do it. They're going to pay them to do it, and they're going to since it's basically a blank check, they're going to charge them whatever they want. So it's like, oh man, it's like we wish they would be able to take care of that within the community itself.
Well, so that's kind of what we've done up in Atlanta. So I, actually resigned this past week, but I spent 2 years as the chairman of the Rural Atlanta Highway Commission. So, we have, 60 miles of dirt road that we have to keep relatively graded. We have to go clear slides, rock slides, trees, all that stuff year round. But the beaver, because the road runs right along the river, beaver have washed it out and caused millions of dollars of damage. So I actually worked with Idaho Fish and Game, and I got a special kill permit because I'm a licensed trapper. So, I wasn't charging the highway department. I was doing it on my own. But these areas where these beaver would build up the dams because no one's trapping anymore out there, really, it's just me. We'd have hundreds of beaver all up and down. Like I took 12 beaver out of one lodge, and then within like a month, it was rebuilt. Jeez. It's just amazing how many are up there. And it was nice that we were able to work with Fish and Game to be able to do that, to your point. But not making money on it, but still, the ability to help out the community, because without that, all we could do is take the backhoe down, rake the dam, and then wait to see where they popped up again, which they would.
Yeah, because they're just their animalistic instinct is to go back to it and be able to build a home, and unfortunately, that always ends up causing damage to everybody else. We're literally in their backyard, just paying rent on it.
Yep, 100%. But yeah, it's been a journey, man. 100%, and it's been a steep learning curve. And I've talked with some people who've hunted their whole lives. They're like, you have been able to do so much more than I have, and I've been hunting my entire life. And it's like, well, it was an interesting way to get into it as an adult, with the maturity and the funds, frankly, to be able to go as full bore in as I was able to. But it was interesting to kind of see in a lot of instances. Granted, I have tons to learn in every aspect, but a lot of like average hunters, I've been able to excel quite rapidly, with a lot more initial fumbling up front. But once I kind of hit that street and really got into everything, it's, the beaver trapping helps my elk hunting, and the wolf trapping helps, antelope hunting. It's funny where you start to see these connections across these different animals and how the patterns and, everything ties together.
What was when you just mentioned like with beavers and elk and everything, I was like, what was your biggest, what was the trigger for your aha moment that these two live within their own realms? Like, what was that? How'd that occur?
Well, it was just the catalyst moments of trapping that made more sense for my hunting. And what I mean by that is when you trap, and I mentioned it a little earlier, it's so intimate. Like you're in there. Like I remember the first time I was in like an area that I was beaver trapping. Never caught a beaver before. I knew where they were coming out. I had conibears set up at the entrance and exits of the lodge. I had all the swim lanes just rigged. I had footholds on the dam where I broke through it. Man, I thought there is no way I'm coming home without a beaver the next day. You know what happened the next day? I didn't take home a beaver. Okay. Like, it's just, the thing is, these animals are so smart and they become so quickly, trap aware. And if you make one mistake and you don't take the time to study them, which I didn't do enough that first time, understanding really where they're coming at, setting up trail cams, doing the things that I knew I should have but didn't, they know. And it was that level of intimacy that I had to get with beaver, marten, wolf still, that translated back to more of the spot and stalk nature of like taking my time, really understanding what these animals are doing at a given time, doing the research you talked about at the beginning, like, what is elevation doing? What is the weather doing? What is, all of these different factors? What moon phase are we in? And that's what really translated from trapping, because trapping forces it. Whereas sometimes you can get away with shit in hunting, like there's luck, there's, just other things that kind of play into it more. Or you can kind of brute force your way a little bit, but trapping, you can't do that. And, that was the catalytic moment for me to translating from one to the other. It's, focus, understanding, and then taking that to another pursuit made me more successful in the other, pursuits like elk, antelope, bear, things like that.
Actually, it's a very good parallel to them. So with you being in the area up there in Atlanta, did you use the internet to help you learn more skills, or did you actually have people in the area be able to take you and guide you along with what they're past their knowledge on?
If he's listening, I owe so many beer to Coon Creek Outfitter or Coon Creek Outdoors on YouTube. I think his name is Stu Miller, maybe. But anyways, okay. He runs a trapping channel. He has for a long time, and he has these great tutorials for, a trap setting. But more importantly for me, it was how do you skin an X, a fox, a coyote, whatever. And then how do you flesh it? How do you board it? And then do you want to do your own self-tanning? And he was my, god of trapping, like at least of skinning, fleshing, and learning. So like similar to how I started with the deer with an iPhone between its back legs stuck with rigor mortis, I'd have my little iPad set up right next to this fox that I was about to skin. And, just like one by one, like I'd have a fox and I'd have my Havalon and I'd be running it down the Achilles. I'd be looking, trying to hit the iPad to pause it with my elbow so I didn't get blood everywhere. And, just step by step. So it was YouTube. I mean, some of the old timers would come up to my cabin every once in a while and, shoot the shit, but it was mostly just digital mentors, man. That's the one hat tip I have to the technological age we live in. I wouldn't have been able to do it without that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've learned so much about, like, I learned how to grunt and bleat through YouTube, setting in the field. Like, I'm in the rut right now. I'm not seeing any action. Like, what can I do? What tools do I have that I can actually go forward? And like, with being able to have social media, we were able to learn all these different techniques to help us become better and better. Like, I was talking to Orlando Vivon last week about how he shot his 195 non-typical there in Iowa. Yep. And he was just going through all the things that you were going through, and he's only been hunting since 2019. And so this was his only second buck. And it's just like, what I told him at the end of the podcast is that you'll just learn all the things everything you've done this year in 2022. Always follow your gut, because he was getting a lot of negativity and a lot of doubt. But it's like, he's like, my data's showing this, my wind's showing this. It's like, all my data points are making sense. And he's similar to all of us. We all keep track of our exposure by multiple means. Like, I do a lot of my detailing in Onyx Map, because this way I like it. It's very good. And one thing about it is that it's very widely accepted by the DNR, because it's like, if you ever get in our fishing game, if you ever have a conversation about trespassing, that is their go-to, because Onyx has done such a now the podcast's not sponsored by them by any means, but they just do a very good job for it. And that's kind of what leaded me over towards, is because if the authority is using it, I'm going to use it.
Yep. I've got my elite membership. I love Onyx because, like, we live where there's no cell phone service. So it's, great for me, and where I can mark traps, and I can even let people know that I'm friends with who might be hunting an area where I have live traps. I can send them drop a pin and be like, hey, try not to step right here, please. Because I don't want to reset it. And, I don't want you to have a bad day, or your dog or anybody else to have a bad day. So.
Oh, definitely, man. That is genius. That is really thoughtful of you to be actually go the extra mile. Like, hey, watch out for this stuff right here.
Well,
So,
beyond that too, I actually have laminated signs. Like if you talk about anxiety,
okay,
the first night that I ever had foothold traps out, I didn't sleep. I had all these imaginations in my head of, somebody in our community's dog, because everybody's dog just kind of runs feral themselves out there, mine included. And, when you have either bait or lure or something, I had these, well, they weren't nightmares because I wasn't sleeping, but these visions of like, oh no, so and so's lab's going to get stuck in my trap. Or, people are going to be out hiking. So I go above and beyond where I always print out signs, which Fish and Game, they have a little template you can use that says, hey, live traps around. So if you go around my cabin for like a 2 mile radius, you're going to run into these signs all over the trees. Or if I trap downriver, I put them up where it's very visible from the road, because it's just, that's not worth it. Those are the horror stories and the things that, really fuel, anti-trappers, because no one wants to get their dog. I don't want to get my dog stuck in a trap. It's not lethal. And it can be very easily released, but it's still not a fun thing to go through. And I think that's something that trappers nowadays have to be extremely cautious about and extremely vigilant about, to educate people what's going on in the areas where people recreate. Because frankly, people recreate where people trap. Sometimes not, but most of the time it's true. There's not a 0% chance that someone will stumble upon what you're doing.
oh, exactly. Even with some of the public land that we have around here and stuff like that, those who trap, luckily a lot of trapping seasons don't start until after, well, pretty much when after all the hunting season's over with, anyways.
Mhm.
But you we there we yeah, it is a wise thing to do. But all the public land I've walked on, I have not seen any of those signs out there. But then again, we don't in my areas. Like I don't have a whole lot of bodies of water going through there where they're going to have those animals that are high target animals to trap for.
Mhm.
Now, I was thinking about this here with everything because you have two kids. How old are your kids?
Well, we have two under two now. So we have a 1 year, 7 month old who is just a fireball. She's a little girl and she is, a feral child through and through. She'll cry when we take her in. She just wants to be out in the snow, playing, whatever. And then we have a now, I guess, almost 3 month old, pretty much Irish twins. They were back to back. Quick fire.
Yeah, I know that my wife is an Irish twin, so it's like yeah, you're gonna have well, at least the nice thing is you're well rounded enough where you can be able to provide them an education outside of going to public schools. So it's like, and you be able to do it all at home. It's like that's the thing I'd like to do with my kiddo, but it's like I don't have the flexibility with my ex to be able to do that. But that would be nice to be able to pull them out there because it's like she's at the point in time where we can focus primarily on math and reading and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
look at sentence structure and such to be able because when they're at school, their whole method is confusion because you go from English, then you go to science, then you go to math, or you'll switch to PE, and there's no constant with the whole process. You're jumping from one thing to the next. So this way, then the information that was just divulged to them now is no longer. It's kind of muddied.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And so we're excited about that. And also just the coolness, like, when I had that otter and a beaver downstairs, that, our daughter comes and pets and looks and, investigates. And then she sees me fleshing it and she's like, you know, touching stuff and, enjoying it in the outdoors. And, you know, I believe there's something in the fresh air they're getting out there versus, a city or something like that. So we're very fortunate, but it is a handful having two kids under two, trying to run trap lines, trying to write books, trying to keep a job. It's a busy life.
Good thing your wife is just like you said, she's a G when it comes down to the whole process. Now the nice thing is though, like with you being in that, like I've had conversation not online but offline where like what is an appropriate age to get kids introduced to it? It's like immediately. Like
Yeah.
if you're in a situation like Zach Hanson here in Atlantic, Idaho, it's going to be immediately. And like then you have the perspective here with us, like when we live in Madison or Eau Claire or Rochester. It's like when do it's like you should be doing it right away. Like when I shot I have a buck behind me here. When I shot her, my daughter was 3 years old, and she was out there watching, and while I was sitting there caping it and breaking down the meat and stuff like that, and going through the whole process. Like I was doing the whole thing for 12 hours straight for breaking down the animal. So it's like, but you know how it is. It's like you're gonna be dedicating so much more energy for whether an animal you trap or you shoot. Now, Zach, do you primarily just bow hunt, or do you gun hunt as well?
I have never taken an animal with a rifle, and it's not for lack of want. When I got into this and I got into bow hunting, I thought it was some sort of more righteous pursuit, right? And it wasn't until I came out west when I realized, like, it doesn't matter what weapon you take an animal with, like, you're getting your ass kicked no matter what, and it's hard. So I ended up getting a 300 PRC, and I ended up, again, because I didn't know anything, I went to a long range shooting course, so was able to take it out to about 1,500 yards and ping steel there, which was cool. But I don't shoot it enough to feel confident. Like, I've got it 0 to 200. I've taken it with me on some hunts and never had the opportunity. I'm not against rifle hunting. It just hasn't been a priority for me yet. And again, now I'm back in that lull where I feel like I need to go to another course or, really get out and practice throwing lead down range before I'd feel comfortable, trying to take an animal with it. I feel way more comfortable with my bow, but that's also because I can sit here and shoot, just 10 yards and get reps in, or go outside and I have 100-yard range for my bow, and I can shoot 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, up to 100.
Yeah, that is a big thing, because that's why why motivated me to get into archery, because I can go back and pick up my ammo. It's like I shoot my 5 arrows and I go down and grab and pull them back and shoot 5 more. With 300, well, it's like that's like $1.75 a round. That gets real expensive real fast.
Yep.
And so, like, I shoot a 30-06, and that's $1.60 a round right now. And I live in a well-populated area, but it's like when it comes down to the availability of lead is because of what happened during, I think it was 2010 or 2011. During that time frame, the government shut down all of, or not, if not all, the lead mines.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they shut down all the big ones down there in Missouri, and that has shown ripple effects as of now. But the best way to get rid of a means is to stop being able to, or remove the ability to produce them, because you can't get rid of the Second Amendment, because it's like, if you do that, well, now everybody's going to be armed, and if somebody comes knocking on my door, it's like, well, I can't call the police or the ambulance because what I did was illegal, and what I'm doing right now is illegal. So it's like, well, I just got to call 811.
Yep, exactly.
I was listening to that argument. It's like, that's actually really well put together, because it's like now you're leveling the playing field, because the people that are not going to follow law are not going to follow it regardless.
Yep, no, 100%. And we live in crazy times. We know that. But to answer your question, I've been predominantly a bow hunter and a hobby shooter. And hopefully we'll get better at it and be able to take an animal with my rifle one day. I mean, I take my 22 on my trap line, so that's kind of my dispatch weapon. So I'm doing that from a shooting perspective.
Definitely. So then, as a sidearm, what do you carry for a sidearm then? Because I know just in the last 2 months, we've had those rustlers getting tangled with the grizzly bear. Then we had one guy get chased by a mountain lion. We've seen somebody get bluff charged. I mean, there's been a lot of heavy aggressive animal interaction here over the last few months.
Yeah, I carry a 44 mag, usually on a chest holder. So a Super Red Hawk Alaskan. That's kind of my go-to. And bear spray. And fun story, and this is not in the book, so I'll tell you this one.
Okay.
My buddy and I were elk hunting up in not in the White Cloud, sorry. We were up in Henry's Lake, so kind of up near West Yellowstone, so grizzly bear country. So we were carrying bear spray. And I'll tell you what, I'd almost rather carry bear spray now than a 44 Magnum. And the reason being is we were driving to the trailhead for archery season. This was in September, super warm. And we're in my truck. We're going down this dirt road. My buddy's kind of putting his boots on beside me at 4:30 a.m., whatever. And all of a sudden you hear, and he goes, shit, bear spray. And all of a sudden the whole cab fills up with bear spray.
Oh shit.
So what had happened is his release on his bear spray had come off, and it was in his vinyl pack, which was in the floorboard, and he was putting his boot on, and he just crunched the trigger. And it sprayed directly into his leg. And, I'm buckled. So, like, I'm trying to pull over, eyes swelling, throat swelling. We're rolling out of the car and, laughing and crying all at the same time. It was terrible. And it was funny because he took a direct hit to his pants, and his pants were orange and his leg was orange, and it started to swell. And then we kept hunting that day. Like, we let it all go. We washed our eyes out, and it was just a miserable day to hunt. And about halfway through the day, the poor guy's like, man, I can't keep these pants on. I'm starting to sweat. So he ended up taking his pants off and hunting in his underwear the rest of the day. But it was insane. So bear spray works is the moral of that story. And I would almost rather get shot with a 44 Magnum than get bear sprayed.
Oh man, the thing is too, it's like I've listened to some of the segments from Steve Rinelli. He says once the bear spray goes off on your gear, it's done. You can't do anything with it. He was talking about like the means that he would use to be able to try to remove the smell, and he could never completely remove it out of the fabric. So it's like, well, time for some new gear.
Yeah, I think that was kind of, we definitely washed those pants, but I'm sure everybody was smelling us from a mile away that day, which is, my excuse of why we weren't successful. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't the moon phase. It's that we were walking bear spray scent balls.
Yeah, that does play a role, but it's playing the wind. That's the biggest thing. I know this year I've really honed in on playing the wind, and it's like I spent some time up north hunting at a buddy of mine's place, and his prevailing wind is north northwest, and so I
Mhm.
sat in that tree stand at 25 degrees, 15-mile-an-hour winds, and I
Oof.
dealt with it. And I had encounters. I sat there, I prayed a little bit, and the good Lord answered my questions and answered my prayers, but the opportunities were just too young. I got a spike
Mhm.
buck, a little forky, a doe, and a fawn. And talk about getting to your morals is like, man, that doe would have been great in the freezer, but she had a fawn, and that fawn was that year and a half year old mark, and it's like, or fresh off for really getting rid of the spots, and it's like, man, I just couldn't do it. I just didn't want to pull the trigger, and I wanted. It's like, well, if she's pulling that, but what came to my mind was is that what if that spike buck was the twin of of the doe?
Yeah.
Don't know if that's true or not because I've always seen I've had properties that produce twins,
Mm.
and there will always be does. So it's like I never know if it could be two separate genders for when they have their twins. So it could possibly been that way, but like that if that's the place that if that's the thing, it's like that doe has as more protection than anything else on the property.
Yeah. Yeah. It's everything's a mind twist out in the woods. I think that's the biggest thing is it's the most meditative, frustrating, and intimate experience you can have on earth is just getting out there and chasing animals, whether you take one or not. And when you do take one that you regret, or then you don't take one that you regret, like there's so much mental growth you go through on any hunting journey, whether that's squirrels or whether that's big game or trapping. It's just, if you talk about, and this is the thing I never understood when I saw hunters growing up and why I never went to it. I didn't understand the level of maturity you really need to be a good hunter, the understanding of animals and conservation. And when you get out there and you really start to learn, and especially as an adult, I feel you can appreciate it a little bit more, especially if you don't have a mentor to coach you to appreciate it. But if you want to learn about yourself, if you want to learn about just the world that God's given us, like get out in the woods, period.
Oh, definitely. I think one of the biggest takeaways in my youth was the definition between life and death because the first time you pull that trigger and you see that animal fall, whether it be a rabbit or a squirrel or a moose, when that
Mm-hmm.
thing falls, is like that's like there's nothing you could do to rewind that situation back. So
Yep.
with that playing in mind, it's like it always makes you think like every action has a reaction to it, and that consequence could be dire type scenario. So that's one thing that I really resonated like as I've got older and recognized some of these lessons that I've learned from when I was with my father. It's like now I have appreciation behind that. That's why I think it's always good to get, like you mentioned, get out in the wild. Now, there's one thing that I'd say it just kind of came to me is like mental health.
Hmm.
You went through a divorce. You moved thousands of miles away from the South. How did that? How did what you went through with the divorce and how did the outdoors help repair your soul,
Yeah.
your to bring you whole again?
It's and again, I talk about it some in the book, but I want to touch on this more intimately. Apparently, that's my favorite word tonight, but um, it's true because it's an intimate experience. And for me, I didn't realize how rehabilitative it would be because I'd been on a few hunts. I knew I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had harvested a buck. I had a freezer or a chest full of deer meat to bring with me on this journey. So I wasn't coming in empty handed. But the real work of learning and being out in the northern woods for me in the steep country with the dangerous animals, the no cell phone service, because like when I sat in a tree stand in Tennessee, I could scroll Instagram or whatever, and it's very hard to disconnect. But from where I chose to be, when I walked out my front door and I got out of 20 yards of my home where I had a Wi-Fi router, there was nothing. And it was that silence, that forced silence for me every time I went to do a trap line, elk hunting, antelope hunting. It was just me and occasionally a friend who would come with me. And that was it. And those fostered these relationships and like these, what I consider to be like rewiring of my brain back to the ground. Because when I'd sit there and I couldn't pull out my phone to look and see what Steve Ranella was doing somewhere else on earth, it was me like focusing on grass or me focusing on how hungry I was or how bored I was or why it wasn't going the way I'm thinking. And then eventually into that mindset of why am I wasting my brain cycles? And I could be sitting here studying the minutia around me to become a better hunter. And that was what was rehabilitating to me, is just a full disconnect, unplugging from the system, if you will. And that was the real healing moment for me. And that's what I encourage people. I talk to a lot of friends or veterans and stuff, and just unplug. Like you don't need all the other stuff. Like I work in tech, I work in AI. I've helped architect some of the things like infinite scrolling and all these other terrible things that are plaguing our nation. And there's some guilt there too. But like you have to make a conscious effort to remove that from your life. And it's almost impossible to do that fully. Heck, we're talking on a live stream on YouTube. And if I had an Instagram, we would have been doing it on Instagram. So you can't fully unplug, but when you do go out, you can make a conscious effort to take, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, 3 days, a week, a year, and just be fully away. And it's amazing how quickly you can reintegrate into like, people call it like your monkey mind, right? Like what it used to be like. And there's something enchanting about it and something that's really rehabilitating about it.
That's exactly right. That's what I like about it. Like hunting in the bluff country here, I can go in one little cove and not have a single ounce of service. So I was like, sweet, I'll shut off my mobile data and I'm just out there in the now. I have my Onyx map up there looking like, okay, where's this? It's like, cause like I was literally went out on, was it Tuesday or was it Monday? Oh, it was Monday. Went onto a piece of property. First time stepping on this public land. Pulled in, parked my truck, walked in, deer sign, really, really consistent. Walked a little bit more deer sign. Okay, well, and I pull up Onyx, like, oh, there's a transition point for bedding. Here's a transition point. This is where I want to be. And then here's the field where they're gonna go eat because, like, well, oh, they just got done pulling all the corn out. So guess what? That's gonna be a thing. I was only out there for an hour. I bleeded twice without a call, and here walks in a 6 point.
Oh
And
wow.
it's like it's like the side he comes in on is like there's not a lot of brush, which is like, oh, this is awesome, but it's all the small fine twigs that I can't see, And I had a couple spots picked out as it grew darker after last light or after dusk, and he just wouldn't get there. And I was like, well, I snort wheezed at him to see if he would turn around, come down. He just nope, I'm not even interested. But that was a good play in wind control, scent control, and thermals, because he was probably a good 30 feet higher than I was, and I'm down below. So it's like it would have been a 30-yard upshot. But I've done a lot of practicing throughout the season to be able to prepare for a shot like that. So I'd have been right up my alley. But it was great to be able to have that disconnect and like not being able to receive any text messages or anything like that. It was just great, just being in the now, and it's just like I just love it. Now today, I came across a study that a guy out in Arizona was just mid 70s, maybe 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s. He was talking about he was always in chronic pain. Now, when you go out there and you go out hunting and stuff like that, and you're closer to the earth, like how does your body begin its process of relaxing beginning the process of relaxing when you are on a backpack trip in 10, 15 miles?
Yeah, I mean that's a hard question because it sucks. Like it's a mental relaxation for me, like, versus a physical relaxation. Like I'm not feeling like I'm melting into the earth and my body's like I'm wrecked when I come back from doing like 60 miles in the backcountry, right? It's rough stuff. And that's why we talked about training and doing that kind of stuff. But, I've always found, and I think that's why I've always been attracted to tough things. I did tough things in suburbia to, seeking out what the real toughness was of like getting out in the woods, getting caught in snowstorms, all that. Doing jiu-jitsu, ultramarathons trained me up for that, but it's getting out there. It's like when you can break your body down so much that your mind just finally just lets go and be like, I'm just surviving. And you kind of get into that like reptilian brain. Like that's where you can rewire yourself and talk like, I can do this. I'll survive this. And like when you actually have to have those legitimate conversations with yourself of saying like, this is hard. This sucks. I'm doing this for a good reason. I'm doing hard things to learn about myself. Then you really start to, and you get to see where your own limits are. And that's where it goes for me. So like, I'm just that type. I have to go to the wall and then peek over. Otherwise I'm not growing.
Understand. I can understand this. I mean, now what I was getting with that is that this gentleman figured out that he basically what he did is he grounded himself. So what he did is he went and grabbed some of that metal duct tape, taped it all up along his bed, and then he took a wire and tied it to a rod and stuck it in the ground, and he was able to level himself off. And he was able to actually reduce the chronic fatigue and the arthritis in his body, because he was saying in his conversation or his interview was that he always had to go to sleep with an Advil in his system to be able to actually get comfortable enough to do that. Well, now it's like he piqued the interest from somebody out in San Diego, and like, okay, well, I'll do it. And it's like I won't charge you for it. And it's like, and it just like wanted to show that you couldn't do that. And then all of a sudden they did a test of like 50 or 60 people, and they started recognizing like there is something to this about being grounded to the earth. And I was like, that's pretty profound to be able to do that. And I think that's why, like I was talking to Johnny Mulligan, and it's like why he feels so at peace being out there, because his body is now connected to the earth, the magnetic frequency. And now they're starting to show, based off of this study, that there's a lot of pluses and minuses to that. And so now we're probably going to start seeing people, hopefully we'll start doing that type of holistic approach, because now you can easily figure out a means to connect yourself to the earth through your sheets, your bed, and just have it grounded. So this way then you're always have that I guess you'd be basically essentially grounding out the EMFs that your body produces.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe in that. Like, there's also the movement of like just taking your shoes off and putting your feet in the grass, right? It's the same general concept. It's like grounding yourself. And I think we as sportsmen, sportswomen are lucky. Like if you're out trapping, like it can be 3 in the morning, you're in a river, you have the rushing river around you, your boots are on the ground, you're freezing, you're digging through dirt to like set a trap, you're moving sticks, or you're out in the woods, you're moving stuff around, and like you're touching stuff. and you're being a part of it. And that's not something people get. And you get these smells like this, the native smells and all that stuff that's filling your lungs. And I don't see that being at all a negative. Like that can only be good for you. So I mean, aside from the pain of doing these long backcountry hunts, like, yeah, I think there is a restorative component to being just outside, period, which is pretty awesome.
Oh yeah. So getting towards the end here, the book.
Yep.
So, is this self-published, or did you have to find a publisher to get this book off the ground?
Publisher. So it was a journey. So actually, Tucker Max, the guy who wrote the "I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell," multi New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the book.
Yeah. So I went down to Texas and met with him, and he ripped everything to shreds out of the gate, and then we built it back up from scratch. But went with him and his publishing company, Lioncrest Publishing, and knocked it out in about 8 months total, soup to nuts. From all the different book design, book layout, editing, copy edits, the whole lot. So it was a quick turnaround, but it was a fun experience working with those guys down in Texas.
So now with this book, are you going to be going on tour or anything like that? How are you beginning the process of promoting your book to get people to learn about your journey and such?
It's a little holistic. Like there's some traditional means, like you can get it at Barnes and Noble, things like that. So, I don't have a following. I'm not an influencer. So that's kind of like, if you really want to sell a book, well, first become an influencer. So I'm not doing it that way, obviously. But it's been pushing and resonating with a lot of the trapping community. So like the Idaho Trappers Association, Montana Trapping Association, those guys have gone out of their way to really help promote the book and kind of get some of the initial sales off the ground. I've been talking with Sportsman International, a bunch of conservation, backcountry hunters and anglers. They are potentially going to push it a little bit for me if once they're done reading the book, and assuming they enjoy it. But I think it's a great opportunity from a book perspective to demystify what it means to get into hunting as an adult, because it's the story of me learning the hard way. And I don't spare any detail about the gore and the frustrations and, the reality of learning these things as an adult. And I think there's a lot of mental barriers for people who are thinking about it, but don't want to cross that chasm because maybe they don't have mentors. Like, I didn't have a mentor, but I'm hopeful that this will bring more people who have been hunt curious or are getting hunt curious into the space and to realize like it's doable. You can figure it out, and there's better ways now. You can find mentors, and there's some great resources out there for that. But that's the goal. So I'm not going on tour. You might see me at a few different conferences. I'll be at like the Western Hunt Expo in Utah, and a few other places next year. But I'm just going to kind of let it see how it goes. I didn't have any expectations with the book. I didn't do this to become a New York Times bestseller. I just wanted to get my story out there because the few people I talked to, they're like, shit, like I went through the same thing, or, I've been thinking about doing that too. And this is such useful information for me. So it was more of a, I don't think I'm an anomaly. I think there's more people out there like me, and I'd rather expose them to say, hey, keep going. You can do it and figure it out. And it's a great life on the other side when you do.
Oh, definitely. That's a great philosophy to have. So you said you were also writing as well. Are you doing a part 2 to this, or are you actually coming up with another nonfiction?
Actually, fiction,
Okay.
of all things. So I'm a big fan of like Westerns. So I actually have written and already edited, and I'm shopping around for a literary agent for a historical Western based in Atlanta, Idaho, because there's so much cool history in this little town.
Yeah.
There was a huge Chinese diaspora during the gold mining era, and they used to scrape the bones of Chinese. So the title of the book is The Bone Scraper, and it's kind of like Quentin Tarantino meets Louis L'Amour.
Oh,
Western.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's a series. So we're starting off in Atlanta, Idaho. That's the first book, and it's finished and edited. And now I'm working down to the Owahis in southern Idaho, and some of the mine wars that went on there in the 1860s. And then we'll work up to Henry's Lake and some of the Basque and Peruvian influences in Idaho. So I've been doing lots of research. I sat with the Historical Society before I wrote it. And just hammering out writing. I just enjoy writing, and the fiction's a new thing for me. I've never been a big fiction guy, but the bug bit me, and I just decided to start writing.
An author that I admire. I've actually gone to a couple of his lectures. Called his name's Graham Hancock, and he does a
Mhm.
lot of things about younger Dryas, asteroids, big history buff, always trying to push the narrative of like trying to debunk the narratives being passed down from like Oxford and what is it was some of the other bigger like not MIT, but Harvard and Princeton and stuff
Mhm.
like that, trying to really bring down their narrative that they're trying to control what they want to produce. But he did a series about during the time of Montezuma, and it was I haven't read the book, but it's basically what they did is he turned it into a love story. So the
Yeah.
story itself is a love story, but everything around them is factual. And
Mhm.
it actually was going on, and I thought it's like that is a really good way of writing a good book because not only you're being entertained by the love story, but you're also getting adventure with it too. Because now these people are living what we only know about in history books. It kind of gives a different perspective to it. And I like that approach because when you mentioned Quentin Tarantino, I literally just watched From Dusk Till Dawn yesterday. It's like, oh, that could be a very entertaining book because
Yeah,
it's like,
it's extremely violent, but it's historically accurate. And there is, a through character of like good morals and everything. So it was a lot of fun to write.
that is fantastic. So when do you think is it gonna be on the shelves coming out after
It'll
Christmas?
be, it'll be, yeah, that book will be out not until probably 2024, to be
Oh,
honest.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
the lead times for these books are insane. Like my 8 month journey to get this book out the door, and I already had some writing done when I went there.
Yeah.
That's Herculean efforts of speed and pushing. So it was, writing a lot very quickly, and I had a great publishing team. So that's the exception. It's usually a 1 to 2 year time frame for getting something out the door.
No kidding. See, I've never really actually looked into doing writing a book. I do a better job with talking, so it's always good to hear like how somebody goes through the whole process. I think one of my next guests is going to be Charles Beatty, the Prince of Poaching. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if you're familiar. Are you familiar with Charles Beatty?
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah, I've listened to all of his podcasts so far. He approached me here a couple years ago, but I've just gotten. I hate to say it, but he kind of got lost in the mix because I follow my dopamine, and it's like, and if it doesn't, it's like I have to really dive into it immediately. Otherwise, my ADHD kicks in, and then I'll like, oh well, I will bring him on. I'll bring him on. And it's like all of a sudden, like, dude, I was supposed to have you like on a couple years ago. It's just amazing how things go through, and it's like I've danced around the idea about doing more than one episode a week, which I was at a period of time, but it gets too much, and it's like I don't allow an episode to really resonate and have a chance to explore, and also have a chance to promote it. So with my newest sponsor with Panther Vision, it's going to be kind of one of those things where I'm actually going to be able to have some marketing dollars to be able to put in some episodes and just kind of do like a day type push for it because it doesn't. I don't need a whole. If it takes off organically and then like people share it, then it could have an opportunity to be able to do more. But I don't need to dump like 5 to 10 $15 a day in for marketing for one episode. It's like I'm only if I can get a couple thousand people to look at it, I'll be happy with it. But because of way Meta's destroyed a lot of the algorithms, it's very difficult to get your podcast out there and get the reach what I once had.
Yep.
So I have to actually spend some advertising dollars, but doing these lives and such have been fruitful. Even doing why I mentioned Instagram is because it allows the people to actually look at it, and it's like it's tied to it with my for when I use Zoom YouTube, it doesn't always translate to notifications and such for those who are subscribing to the podcast because I also want the audio. So why I
Mhm.
record it's like, well, I'm live. Why are you recording? Well, now it's like I'm going to get a audio copy so this way that people don't want to watch it, they can at least listen to it. And so now I'm hoping that Murphy doesn't show up here after I hit end. So we'll see what all happens, man. But what are some of the best ways to reach out to you, Zach, for reaching out to becoming a mentor, like asking questions about trapping, or actually, like, let's say another guy has gone through a divorce or something traumatic happened. What are the best ways for a guy or somebody like that to get a hold of you so this way then you can be a good tour guide?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, first off, I'm an open book, so anybody who wants to reach out, please do. really the best way is LinkedIn, which is how Jeff and I got connected. That's really my only social media. I pretty much put an annex on everything else, several years ago. So you can find me there, Zachary Hanson. I'm the guy with a mustache and a cowboy hat, and you'll see a picture of my book. So I'll be pretty easy to find there. But message me. I'm happy to talk to anybody. I've got some great connections with Stephen Makovich on LinkedIn, who's putting together some coaching programs for people. So shout out to him. Eric Morris. There's a bunch of people who are really pushing, opening their arms to people who want to learn. I'm almost also there too. So if you have any questions or thoughts, do that. But yeah, I hope people enjoy the book and can laugh at all of my follies as I learned and fumbled my way into the hunting space. And and then Jeff, I hope I can get out to Wisconsin at some point to go maybe play in some of those bluffs.
Oh man, you'd absolutely love it. Especially like didn't realize I have something like 2,300 acres, like 15 minutes away. Never stepped on the property, and it's like I already had deer. I had a buck of six, a little basket six within the
Yep.
first 70 minutes of me being in there. So right before it got dusk. But I think a quick way for us is to be just like I'm looking at doing a TAC event or doing something or mountain archery challenge. Like that's a good place for us to meet because it's like not only
Yep.
can you promote your book, but you can also go out there and shoot the course and have a blast. Because I have friends of mine in South Dakota, and it's like they're like, "Hey, it's like I went east. Can you come west?" Well, it's like to go west. It's like I have to go like 15 hours, where you
Yep.
guys only had to come 4 or 5. So it's going to be a upcoming fun year. I've been listening to HHA USA's podcast. They're going to be doing 4 events this year because it's a lot of undertaking, and he's saturated one area, so now he's actually picking other locations that are further away from from HHA home base there in Wisconsin Rapids. So the cool thing is like if you ever come to my area, I literally have Matthews 15 minutes away. We have Tacticam, we have Nose Jammer, we have Predator Camo. Like this is all within like 30 minutes of my house.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to that. So we'll when we get up for part 2, we can make some plans.
Definitely, I'm looking forward to reading about your journey and stuff like. Because I've always been a Jack London fan, but it's nice to bring his experiences into the forefront. But I don't know if he actually did a lot of his stuff. I think maybe his is more fiction, but it's tough to say. But it always reignites the vigor of my youth, like reading this book and being transported into the Yukon, doing the Iditarod.
100%. Well, this won't be the Iditarod. It'll be more me getting my hands stuck in wolf traps and stuff, but you'll be able to live vicariously.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Zach, for coming on the Bucks America podcast. It was a great time to speaking with you. I really greatly appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to hang out with me for a couple hours.
I mean, I loved it, man. Well, I appreciate it, and best of luck with everything. And if anybody wants the book, they can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you can buy your books. Turning Feral, Modern Journey into Hunting, Trapping, and Living More Intentionally in the Wilderness. And thanks, Jeff.
You're very welcome. And on top of that, too, those who are listening, I did put the link to the Amazon in the chat, so this way you can find it. And when I do the show notes for this episode, the link will be in there as well. And I might even put it in my link tree just because you are my first published author on my podcast. It's like I got to give a guy a shout out because it's like I'll do as much advertising as I possibly can, considering you're trying to be as low tech and a high tech world as you possibly can.